Hello. You like that?
I do.
This is Stephanie and Titus Belo from
Ireland.
Ireland, but also from a slice of humble pie.
Yes. And Steph wanted to start this one so she wouldn't make it weird. And then she starts by laughing and waiting 10 seconds before she says anything. So we're doing great.
I said, listen, I got this. We're off to a great start. So, what are we going to talk about today, Titus?
Well, in our first episode, we made a couple references to, wow, that could be its own episode. And so we were thinking, well, right now we don't have our 4 children plus one that we care for. And so we have a little extra time. We thought, hey, maybe we should do one more episode before we have a lot more mouths to feed and things to think about when we're back.
And you'll never hear from us again.
Exactly. Regular life.
Just kidding.
So maybe 2 episodes here at the beginning and then 2 years, and then maybe you'll hear from us again. Hopefully not, but
2 years, we'll give you an update.
Or 7.
2 or 7 years.
Anyway, so one of the things we talked about was that Steph had the opportunity to talk to the Swedish team of ladies in our sister church about her life, and really with the focus being on God's grace through situations that aren't ideal, and a lot of times brought about by either sin or just a lack of focus on God as far as choices, and how that can cause pain and hardship in life. And yet, despite all of that, how God can use that for even greater good as he heals and restores. And Steph has a life story and kind of time getting to know me and just through all of that where God has really done some amazing things. So that was a story she was able to share with them. And we thought, hey, there's pieces of that we'd like to talk about, especially just the amazing grace that you can see in very raw situations. So that'll let you maybe take it away for a little while, and then you tell me
Yeah.
when to jump in.
And you can jump in whenever you want, because that's usually what you do.
Okay. I'll do what I do.
I meant that as a compliment.
I'll take it as well.
So in the beginning of my presentation, we got to talk about being a single mom, me, not Titus. And this was pre-Titus, of course. I had 2 boys. So I had Landon. I had him very young. I had him when I was pregnant as a junior in high school. I was 17, and then I, of course, went on to be a senior in high school, and I was still 17, and I gave birth to my firstborn, Landon Lane Wolfgram. Best kid ever. He was born in the beginning of the school year, so I got to go through high school, my final year of high school, of course, as a mother. That was an experience. That is a podcast all in its own. Just kidding. That was an experience. And then I did, of course, live with my parents when I gave birth because I was, still in high school, so I had to. And I had to grow up really fast. Throughout relationships have been in about 4 years later. So every election year I have a child. So naturally 4 years later came Jacksonator. Jackson Abel was born in 2012.
So then you were 21.
So
if you were 17.
I was. Very good. I was 21.
Just helping.
Wow. I don't math, but you do.
I don't math very well. Keep going.
That was a good one.
But yeah, 17 and 21.
17 and 21.
Now you have 2 kids already.
2 kids on my own. Won't even get into the relationship side of things, but I did decide after Jackson was born, I would say he was probably 2 in 2014-ish, somewhere in there. Towards the end of 2014, I decided, okay, I just got done with I finally walked away from an extremely awful, toxic relationship. and I'm a single mother, and I'm finally seeing the beauty of having faith, because I grew up as a Christian, of course. The church that I met Titus in was my home church all my life. So it's not like I didn't know my God, but I was learning and soaking in and finding all the radio stations with sermons and podcasts and whatever I could get my hands on. I just soaked in as often as possible. And I decided that God's word meant so much to me. And I just said, that's it. I am not going to have a relationship anymore. So I essentially, at this point in my life, I said, I'm not going to get married. And I surprised my parents I told them I was just thinking about fostering, and they were concerned for me, which today we can see why, because my goodness,
We've got 2 kids already.
It's a
Single
trip.
mom.
Yeah. Single mom as a foster parent, obviously extremely doable. And if you can do it, then do it. I would not have been able to do it. But anyways, I was in the process of actually becoming a licensed foster parent. So I was going through the paperwork through the county back in my hometown, and
You were kind of working 2 jobs too, because
I was working tons of jobs.
You were doing
and going
Amex,
to college,
working for American Express. Well, you had finished your degree, right? I thought
2014. Yeah, I guess so.
When you first had Jackson,
Yeah,
but
that
then
was way back
when I came.
Yeah.
But you were also doing that online coaching, like with fitness
that's
people,
right.
because you were going to work and then you were responding to people all the time.
Yeah.
So you were doing a lot of work to make it feasible to have an apartment, take care of 2 kids, save up money, and establish a home.
I mean, then I was going to parent more kids.
You were so busy.
That's a joke.
And thinking about moving.
And I was, well, that's a whole another podcast. No. Yeah. But I was really busy. I was doing everything on my own. But the reason I brought that up is because I was at a point in my life where I did not want to get married, because men were awful. Men were the devil. Mm-hmm. My mama said.
Yeah, and they had caused a lot of hardship.
It was,
often pulled you away from God.
Yes.
You had been with a lot of guys who had done the opposite of bringing you closer to Him, and said they led you away from Him.
Or they would fake being a Christian for me. Yep. That was a big thing. Like,
that's right.
It meant a lot for me, but it was like, oh yeah, it was a placate. It was totally fake, and in the end, it drew me away, because then I couldn't trust people, and I didn't know who was being honest, who was not being honest, and.
But what you were not getting is someone who was genuinely helping you raise your beautiful boys in the Lord.
Right. In the Lord. And that's the emphasis, because, I mean, there's a lot of people who can be great dads or father figures, but I wanted a Christian household, not just by one parent, but by both. And I do not by any means say that you can't marry someone that isn't a Christian, because there's a lot of amazing stories with that too. And I think that I was trying to go that route because I felt like that's all I had as options. But I got to the point where I'm like, okay, enough is enough. I'm done risking it. I'm not one of those people. I'm not able to do that. I'm not strong enough, or so I thought, to do that. So I'm just not going to get married. And I'm going to be a single mom, and I'm going to foster kids. And even though I was absolutely insane, because there's no way that would have worked. And that's going to be my life from now on. So in that time, though, I will say, and I always look back at this, I was so content. Yeah. Right. I had like literally a God-given contentment where I didn't need any man. I was an independent woman. I didn't need no man. And I was fine with that. I wanted that. Forever. And then along came Titus.
Okay, before we go into the train wreck of your life.
Yeah, we need to get you ready for that first.
The real train wreck.
Warm up.
I just wanted to ask a question too.
No questions till the end, please.
No, this is good. Please for it. So, like, I would just say, just talk for a second. Like you said, like, your family was Christian. But I guess what I wanted to talk about for a second before we go into that is like, you were baptized,
Mhm.
you had faith, you believed in God. So it wasn't that like you made these mistakes and that meant you didn't have faith. Um, but you were struggling through that, like struggling to see what faith meant as an adult and
Yeah.
like how this impacted your decisions. And the reason I mention that is because all of us kind of go through a period of that too,
Mhm.
like where we have faith and we know that, or we go to Sunday school and we know the Bible stories and we do believe. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's not real faith.
Yeah.
But then as you begin to make adult decisions and decide what's your priority and what's first and last, um, there's a growing process there of of learning to trust the voice of the Lord and what he says is right and wrong, and then appreciating grace
Mm-hmm.
and what God gives us despite how good we are and what we've done. And would it be fair to say that, that was kind of this process of going through relationships and now being a mom with more responsibility and seeing them in front of you. Now you have these people that are relying on you to be their example, that it puts you in that tough place. And I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's a good point. And so there's a couple things I would say about this. Number one, before I even get into it, I would also add that I was very immature in my
Yeah.
faith. That's a good way to say it. So I knew God. I knew my morals because of what God said, not because of what's good for the planet or what's good for the people. I knew what and what not to do because God was my motivation for those things, but I wasn't mature in my faith, meaning I didn't do my everyday life growing up to glorify God. That wasn't my motivation. That wasn't the way my mind worked.
Yeah.
So I would say growing up, I knew my God, my family, my great grandma actually. My mother can call me out on this, but I know my great grandma was the one that took my mom to church growing up. So that made my mom have such amazing faith, which poured into my life. However, I was very immature in my faith. I did a lot of stupid stuff, which pulled me from God, and that really hindered my ability to grow my faith. And I wouldn't say that's put on me. Of course, I want to be
Mm-hmm.
careful there, but I wasn't embracing my faith like I do today, for example. Um, and because of that, I would say that the birth of Landon, although in sin, of course, I was not married. I was obviously only 17. It was not a beautiful story by any means. I will always say that having him, God made so much beauty come from that.
Yeah.
And so him and then of course Jackson being added to that is what motivated me or pushed me. I would say God used those kids, those boys, to point me to Jesus. And that was a gift for me. So good point.
Yeah. And I think like there's a maturity of faith that came for
Yeah.
you during that.
I needed God. I had nothing else.
Yeah.
I
You had
needed,
to rely on
I
him.
had to rely on him. I had to provide through my means of monetary gain or employment or my education. I had to rely on myself because I wasn't married, and I wanted so badly. My parents were so amazing that they provided me with so much, and I thank God every day for that. But
And they
I was
did. Yeah.
also where I was like, I don't want to rely on my parents and I don't want to rely on other people. I want to do this myself because I did this. I got myself into this situation. And I also, there's a point where a woman wants to be independent. And so I wanted to do it on my own. However, I couldn't. So I had to rely on God for that. And that's what drew me closer to him ultimately. And I yearned for him because I needed hope when I couldn't get hope from anything in this world as a single mother. I mean, there were times when I was like, is my utilities going to be shut off today? And like, miraculously, I would be provided with exactly what I need to pay my bill. Or like, I remember distinctly one time I was literally so close to having no diapers, and my mom showed up with groceries and diapers. Like at my, and that's not something she often did, but that day
But that
she
day,
showed up with groceries and diapers. I will always like that's how, and I just like I had this hope, and I could just everything that was happening in that time of life, it was like there's no way that I can say there's no God listening to me and walking with me through this. And that's why I clung to him, because I knew and I saw it with my own eyes.
and it's crazy. Just for reference, like I still think today, Steph, out of the two of us, is better at trusting that God's going to
Oh, hands
provide
down.
because of those
Yeah.
experiences. Because like I stress out to no end about money, which
But you
sounds
never had to count
terrible,
pennies, right? You never had to count pennies as a single
right?
mom, and I think that gives us different perspectives.
Yeah, where I always had a little bit of buffer because it was
Yeah.
just me, so I could have a little bit set aside. And then obviously with the craziness of life, you don't always have that. But Steph has been through that process of leaning on the everlasting arms of God to get you
Yeah.
through that, and she's seen it happen. Not saying that that means you're careless with money and planning, but
Right.
like my point is I think it comes more naturally to her because of those hard times. So I can
Yeah.
see
My mom's that way
blessing.
to this day too. I remember her saying growing up too, like I had to budget and count pennies. And I had to do that too. And you know what? Sometimes I didn't make it, but by the grace of God, there was a miracle and I made it.
Yeah.
And to this day, I'm thankful for that, because I never have to worry about my utilities being shut off. I am always provided for, and I don't make money my God by any means, because money is not going to get me through. But now we can go into.
Well, one more comment and then I'll go into it
Okay.
because I need a second to talk because it makes me feel better.
He's a slow mover. I'm a fast mover.
Oh, just the one point on the maturity, and I'm not picking on you here. I just like I think it's just such a
Let's move
powerful,
on.
powerful thing with like any young adult who's struggling through what it means to grow up and to make decisions in this world, which is so hard. There's that parallel between your physical maturity as you're growing into just your body as you go through puberty and you go through adolescence. It's so hard to navigate those waters and the relationships of high school and who you are and feeling confident. That maturity and then the spiritual maturity that you're going through at the same time. And I think both of those things are make it really hard to make the right choices because your body is telling you, I need this, I want this, I feel this, I feel lonely, I want this person to be with me forever. And it causes you to make bad decisions because your brain is going nuts and your feelings are going nuts and all of that. And so like I guess I'm just saying for Steph, like a lot of us, if we look back to those years, for those of you who are older than that, um, and you know that you were going nuts and you didn't know what was going on and you were trying to figure it out and your mind, you were just struggling through those days. And if you would have been in the right opportunity in the right moment and someone would have put you into a dangerous situation, you would have made a mistake. You would have made a bad choice. Some of us are protected from that for a little bit longer and some of us aren't. And when that time comes, your maturity is very a big component of that because to say no to something that feels right or that seems right in the moment, it's very hard to say no because of faith unless you have a maturity of character and a maturity of faith that says Jesus is more important to me, even though my instincts tell me that I should do this. So I just wanted to say that, like, because um, it just helps understand it. And I know all of you listening, or at least I hope so, understand that and are willing to be honest about that because we all struggle through those tough decisions and moments in our life. And for anyone who's younger listening to this in adolescence, I feel you. You are in a very tough time. I had one professor tell me, like, right now, your body is crazy and you have to try to learn the principles of Christianity while you're going crazy. And it is in some ways harder for you now than it ever will be. Which I know you have different temptations as you go through life, but especially for guys. And I know it's true of girls too, but for guys during adolescence, like your hormones are nuts and it's dangerous. And if you're not prepared to fight every day, you will fall into temptation, whether it's obvious or it's hidden on your own as you're looking at a screen or doing something in secret.
Yeah.
Anyway, so different tangent.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Yeah. That could be another podcast. Just kidding.
Maturity.
Oh, maturity. We are not good for that podcast. But I will say, so that's a good point. And just to add a tiny tidbit to that, it's also, some people can relate to this, I'm sure. But it's also like you are, whether you're young or old, I don't care. But sometimes you put your hope and your confidence in someone else a little bit too much. For example, I have been guilty of putting my confidence in another man or a relationship to be happy. And in that, you also fall into a lot of temptation or worldly things that look like it's going to help you or feel like it's going to help you because you feel good. And that obviously played a big part in it. And I think that plays a big part in our lives even today. There's a lot of things in this world that are going to give you instant gratification and also make you feel secure. And nothing is secure in this world other than God's grace and God's word. And what he tells you is good and right. And I had to learn that a very hard way. Before we go on, I will also add, and this is a whole nother story, so I'm not going to go into details, but it was really cool at St. Paul's when I got to do a mentor program. We just booked a cabin by the lake. Remember that? Yep. And us older women. Just kidding. I was the youngest one there.
I thought you were young and vibrant.
I was young and vibrant. Oh, yeah.
Woman.
I'm young and vibrant with other older women.
Did you lie to me? Are you older? You've been making fun of me this whole time.
And then
you're older than me? Just kidding.
You're definitely
21.
You're definitely the older one. You're definitely very old. I had some women who were as old enough to be my mother, but also some older women there too who were old enough to be my grandmother. And what we did was book this cabin with youth girls. So, late middle school, high school age. And we took them to the cabin. We went canoeing and had campfires and did different things and crafts and stuff and just had a fun weekend. But the biggest reason for that was to kind of have a mentor weekend. Maybe you can think of the verse in the Bible where it says like use, I don't want to say the word elders, but the old people in your life.
Someone's going to send an angry comment for that comment.
I know.
Right there.
Please don't leave a review.
Please
this is not a legit
appreciate the old people in your
podcast.
life.
We are not professionals.
I actually don't know what.
Okay, well, anyways,
right now,
it's to use the older generations in your life to learn from. It's a mentoring
respect
passage.
them. There's one about
cannot think
younger
of
men
it.
respecting, and then young women respecting those.
Respecting them, but also
elders.
learning from them.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
And that's what we were basing it off of. So these young ladies, these young girls were able to come with us, and I shared that very story, and I was able to through tears explain why God says that waiting till marriage is good. There's a reason for that, because no matter what the sin is, he promises it will hurt you and it will hurt others around you. And not only did that sin hurt myself, but it hurt my husband later in life, obviously, because I didn't save all of that for my marriage, which is a gift in itself. I hurt my kids. I put them through so much unnecessary pain, being a single mother, not having a father figure. And that's what sin does. And then you wait for marriage, and it's just the most precious gift, and good reason. There's a reason why God tells you to do that. Now, can we talk about you?
Fine.
Okay, so let me preface this, okay? I got to preface this. So my mom and I go to a Christian concert at our church in St. Paul's. I was going, honestly, to Monday nights at a different church because Tice is telling me to be quiet.
Stop talking. You're just talking very loud. I wasn't.
So many rules to this.
You made me say it out loud.
There was a church in a town over, I think, New London. And I would go there on Monday nights because I was working a lot. So I didn't really get to see my new pastor. His name was Titus Belo. Very often. But this particular night, my mom and I went to a concert at my home church, St. Paul's. And that's when I think I first met you.
Yeah, that's right.
That was the first night I met you.
Chris Driesbach come and
Chris
play a
Driesbach
concert,
came.
which was fantastic.
And Titus was hosting it. So he was talking and blah, blah, blah.
Introduced.
Welcome.
The grace of God.
Yeah.
Not blah, blah, blah. Like really,
Blah, blah, blah.
really cool stuff.
Really cool stuff. I'm sure it was. He did the concert. We get back in the car. I'm sure it was great. Get back in the car and on the way home.
This is a great way to intro that we're married and we actually love each other.
It's a good start to our relationship.
Yeah, he said stuff that was
I was
really
not, okay, but for real, I was not interested in guys at this point. I was like,
so she's imitating her attitude at the time.
That was my attitude towards men. I was like, nope.
Yeah, because your mom was like, oh, he's kind of...
Hashtag no thank you. Yeah, because
kind of cute.
So that's what I was getting at. So we're in the car on the way home from the concert, and my mom goes, so that new pastor is kind of cute, huh? And I said, no. And my exact words were,
He is ugly. No, he is not cute.
No. No, I said, Mom, I will break him. Those were my words. Exact words. Remember it to this day. And so that was enough. I just said, I know, well, because she's like, oh, you should, be friends with him and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like in my head thinking, I know what befriending someone means to my mother. And that is not just a befriending him. It's like get married to him. And I was not going to marry my pastor. That was on the uncool list.
Yeah, that's like the worst thing you can do.
That's weird. So life goes on. I did actually ask you some questions personally about something, a scenario, right? You had counseled me a little bit.
Yep.
After that.
Can I interject for 1 second?
Fine.
Is that okay?
Fine. So this is Titus' show, I guess so.
I just wanted to say, so I'd come there in about 2014, and then you probably came to that concert sometime shortly after I got there, maybe a couple of months.
Yep, it was cold.
And okay. And that was my first call out of seminary. So I went to St. Paul in Clintonville, Wisconsin, and an amazing church with an amazing group of people. Yeah. And it was awesome to be the pastor there. And I had noticed there was this beautiful lady named Stephanie Velo.
Okay.
Well, that's true. But I thought
my name was not Stephanie Velo.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Stephanie Wolfgram. And
that's weird.
That she was way out of my league. And I shouldn't even think about it because of that.
Way out of your league.
So, like, for me, it was like, wow, that would be awesome. Because I was when you come out of seminary without being married, there's a fear that you will stay that way forever, like as a monk. But I will also say, like Steph said, I had been through a lot of relationships and made a lot of poor choices in the past where I kind of thought this is probably better for me to learn to be content on my own. And
you had a lot of learning
I
to do.
finally gotten to a point where I was content. Ministry was great. I was meeting people and serving the Lord. And I had begun to think that maybe this is the way the Lord needed it to be for me too. And so I had kind of gotten to that point of contentment too. But yeah, then Steph reached out to me about her grandpa. And anyway, just talking about the faith. Yeah. And being able to share that with people in our life. And we had a chance to chat about that. And then after that, I kind of dropped the ball and didn't talk to her more. We kind of chatted a little bit.
Let's just
I know you
get
said
there.
later
Let's
that
just say he has a really bad game.
Okay. Anyway, we need to get to the point where we're actually... meant to talk about.
We'll talk about that in another podcast.
Yeah. Later on, so kind of went on like, I was a pastor there and stuff. Kind of, you went about your life and you started thinking about moving somewhere else. And
so let's just jump forward because we've been talking for a while. Let's talk about the one Sunday morning that I was able to go to church in my own church. And Titus was doing a service at the end, he does announcements and he just says, he kind of announces about one of our elders. He was an amazing man. I know him from years back at my home church. He was very ill. He's been in the hospital. The night before, Titus was actually visiting him pretty late at the hospital, so he got home late and then had to preach and do a service that morning. This was a very off Sunday where I didn't have the kids either, so that's an important note. And so I was on my own. The kids were at their dad's, and at the end he said, "Not only did I, stay with this member late last night, I'm going to go back to Madison today. He's moved to Madison. I'm going to go see him there today."
He was airflown there because he was in such bad condition.
Critical condition.
And so it was pretty necessary that I go.
And Madison from Claytonville was over 3 hours. Yeah. It was a big drive. So in my mind, I'm like, man, you are so tired. You were up so late. You did a whole service. And now you're going to drive 3 hours and go see your member. So I'm going to skip a lot of this. But I texted him after service and said, if you need any, if you are open to it, I would love to drive you. So at least you don't have to drive because I'm sure you're exhausted. Please note, I was not interested in him. Not because he's not a wonderful person. I barely knew him, but
we just weren't at that level.
I wasn't there. I wasn't interested. I was worried about him.
And I got the text and thought like, wow, like how often does that happen that a member offers to drive you 3 hours to go do a visit? And I wasn't necessarily thinking like, wow, this is her big move to like woo me.
Yeah.
But that it was a very awesome, generous thing and an opportunity for me
to
get
really
to know her better.
She is a saint.
And she's one of my members. And
sure that's what you were thinking.
That way we could talk some more.
So I didn't get a text back for a while. I was off looking at a new place to possibly move. That's a whole nother conversation.
Thinking through how best to respond.
Yeah, so he was like, do I say yes? Is that weird? She's kind of weird. So then he waited a little bit. I did eventually get a text back like hours later, and it just said like, oh, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
And I was off looking at a new place where I was thinking about moving, and it was like town's over. So I'm like, okay, drop everything, drive back, pick him up. We drive over 3 hours to this hospital, and I wait for like 6 hours while he's chatting.
It was like
don't even go. We don't even
3.5 hours.
3.5
but
hours.
Yes.
And then he comes back out, and we drive back. The moral of the story is this car ride was like where we just like dove in deep conversations. We pretty much. I knew Titus. Titus knew me probably at the end of those car rides better than my mother. It was just intense and deep.
Talked about your past.
Yeah.
We talked about
it was a great
ups and downs.
conversation.
We talked about God. We talked about the importance of having him in our life and his grace that sustains us through ups and downs. And by the end of that car ride, I was like, wow, this woman in front of me.
Cool.
Well, she is filled with grace, and she embodies the fact that Jesus loves her and has forgiven her and made her beautiful and just wants that to be a huge part of her life. And she wants to grow in that and be a part of sharing that with others who have been in similar situations or trying to make it through their tough circumstances. And so by the end of that, I was like, here's not only a beautiful woman on the outside, but someone who loves God's grace, and that grace has impacted her so much, and she's so passionate about it, and that is attractive.
She was a good time.
It was amazing, and so it laid a really awesome foundation for us to spend some more time together, and to try to do that not awkwardly, as you try to date your pastor, and you had to wrap your head around that, and I had to, just be very careful with that, and then eventually we told the elders after 3 months.
So slow down. Yeah, right, exactly. It took a while.
I thought we were trying to go fast.
No, we are.
Okay.
We are, but I just want to make a point of that. So we waited a while, and I was still telling my friends, and, we told our families, but it was a secret to the church. It was just a very personal level because we wanted to make sure that we were serious, because it is very difficult to date a member when you are a pastor.
It's just a lot of pressure with any public position, because then people are watching you and...
And you don't want to, and from Titus's perspective, he didn't want me to be like, what a weirdo, and or later on, we didn't work out, and then
I'm never going back to that church
Right,
because
and that could happen. I mean, I wouldn't have done that.
I was scared of that though.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it was in the back of your mind, like it would. We take. It all goes sideways. Maybe my member doesn't come back because our relationship didn't work. There was a lot of things at stake. And during that time, like I said, we would tell our parents and we told our families, and we were excited about it in that way. Get feedback, and obviously your dad's a pastor, so you get feedback from him, and then just make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. That we really wanted to pursue this in the long run before we told the church or before we talked to the elders. I would tell like my coworkers, and they'd be like, "This is funny." I worked with a lot of people who are not Christian, so I would say, "Yeah, I'm dating my pastor," and they'd be like, "Ew," because in a pastor,
They're thinking of these old
old
Catholic
men,
priests or something that are just like very old with a big beard.
70-year-old men are you dating?
Why are you dating that person?
And then I'd have to explain it and show them a picture and prove it. So yeah, you told the elders eventually at an elders meeting, and talk about that just briefly. Touch on it, how that went. This is the first time they're hearing it.
Yeah, so I was like, well, I've been seeing someone for a while. It is one of our members, Stephanie Wolfgram, and we've had a chance to talk, and it seems to be going really well, and we're getting more serious. So I would just want you to know that, so you're not blindsided or anything, but you also can pray for us or pray for me during this time, and continue to hope it goes well.
And
but
so
just want you to be informed.
And so they know if members have questions.
Yeah,
too.
if members have questions or like, pastor seems like he's being kind of inappropriate with this one girl at church, like obviously
We were
I was
not, by the way.
doing anything there, but just if they see something and they're wondering. Anyway, because the elders are people who are supposed to have the pastor's back. Like,
they're bodyguards.
doesn't mean that, they defend him when he does something wrong, then they're the ones who
hold him
correct
accountable. Yeah.
Because they're supposed to be mutual shepherds with him that are helping him carry out the ministry, and then also to safeguard against his own issues. That's kind of the point of those elders. So anyway, sharing with them, and then right away, I can't forget what one of the elders right away, they just said, this is awesome, amazing news. So happy for you, and this is just a awesome.
And they cried.
Yeah, started crying. Just like, this is a beautiful example of God's grace. And like you said before, these elders knew you.
Yeah.
They
watched me go through these phases in my life, these steps. They watched me become a single mom. One of them was my teacher, my high school teacher. So he was my teacher as I was pregnant, as I was having my child in high school, as I was out of school for maternity leave, all of that. They saw it firsthand, and they saw the path I was going down too, which is crazier because it wasn't a good path. Ask my mom.
Yeah.
I wasn't definitely not living in a Christian life, ultimately. I wasn't embracing that by any means. So they saw all of that firsthand, and now to see God's work in that was beautiful for them.
And I think they could see just how happy I was too. And like that, and then as time went, that the two of us were really complimenting each other and excited about ministry and sharing the awesome grace that we both felt that we were being given by having this relationship and a new chance to make a family built on God and His grace and love one another as Christ has loved us. So
yeah, so it was a great beginning. We were like, okay, great. Like, we have the support of the elders. Now the church can find out. And we didn't do this by like a Facebook post or anything cheesy. We didn't like announce it in church. It was very organically. And obviously people in America like to talk. Word did not take long to get out. We did go to a really good friend's birthday celebration, and that's where a lot of people first found out we were together, and they kind of like put two and two together. So many people were happy for us, but there was a couple that did not like it, and that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today, and our response to that, because there were reasons and they shared them. But let's preface that, right? Because we love these people that didn't agree with it at first. We love them with all of our hearts, and we have no animosity.
And they came and spoke to us
And
privately
it was
to
private.
me.
It wasn't out of malice or bad intent. So let's throw that out there right now. We're not
Yeah.
mad at it by any means.
Yeah. And does that mean it wasn't hard at the time?
It was so hard.
No, it was very hard. But when they came, they expressed that, like, Titus or Pastor, we don't think this is a good idea because we're worried about you. You have such an important job and place in this church, and we're worried that this relationship will hurt your ministry, because they were worried that either Steph wasn't serious about it, or like,
I would taint him.
yeah,
That
or
was an honest worry. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so they were just concerned. And then behind that, for some of them, there was some biblical things too. Like, they would look at the Old Testament and see, like, the priests who were held up to very high standards of what qualified them to work in the temple and that. And so, kind of one of their points from that was that a priest needs to be pure, like he can't have any indecency in his history, or he can't serve in the temple. And so they're kind of saying, like, you can't marry someone who has had kids out of wedlock because they're tainted or like have this history, and that will disqualify you from being a pastor who, in like First Timothy, is described as someone who is above reproach. And so, like, valid concerns. I would say, like, you're looking at scripture and you're thinking, okay, want to have someone who can be looked up to as an example. But that kind of brings us to a crux, because, like, that's hard for every pastor to wrap their head around, because one of the things listed there too is blameless. And could really any pastoral candidate say that they're blameless in the past, that they don't have any sin, or even in that moment, like they've stopped being a sinner all of a sudden when they became a pastor? No. So when we look at those passages, we recognize, like, no human being is perfect. No priest or pastor is perfect. Each and every one of us is imperfect. And so then the question is, like, what does that section mean by being blameless and above reproach if we're not perfect? So anyway, that was kind of like the backbone to some of these objections that came, and saying basically, yes, she's forgiven, because I had said, like, yeah, but she's forgiven, right? You understand? And they would say yes, but the consequences of her, like, more obvious sin, I guess, is that she can't marry a pastor, and that it would hurt your ministry. And that was tough. So read a lot of scripture, prayed a lot, and really dwelled on, what does grace mean? Raw grace in the face of sin. And, like, as wrestling through that and talking through that, one thing kept bouncing in my head is, yes, as a pastor, are pastors, like, very visible in front of people? Yes. Is it important that they do their best to exemplify Christian behavior? Yes. Will they do that perfectly? Absolutely not. And so there will be grace for your pastors, and please show them grace, because they are sinners. But there's also, like, going into a marriage. So one of the big things that I always said is, so when God forgives someone, is that just something that you say, but then, you still look at that person as the sinner that they were? Or does that forgiveness fully absolve them, and now you see them as a redeemed child of God? And everywhere in scripture it says, like, I have redeemed you. I've called you by name. You are not what you were. You are this. Gone with the old, in with the new. And so what I kept coming back to was, yes, Steph has made mistakes just like we all have, but she's been forgiven. She's been redeemed. She's been clothed with the righteousness of Christ. And so when I look at her, and all of us look at her, what we now see is not a sinner who has made mistakes, who will always be tainted and never be at the same standard as other people because she made these sins, but someone who is a child of God, redeemed by grace. And we are called to see them as forgiven children of God. That is her identity. And especially as Christians, that's how we're going to see people who have been forgiven, not someone who's a lower class because of sin or something in the past. And I think it's harder maybe for in Christian circles sometimes when things are public or visible like that. Like, okay, the kid's right in front of me, so I know this happened. But that doesn't make the sin any worse. How many sins that I've committed during my past and even while I'm at the seminary and while I'm a pastor that are more hidden, and yet I'm still qualified to be a pastor. So like, if we are expecting the pastor's wife to be perfect or not to have any record of wrong in her past, that is just a ridiculous standard to put anyone to. And anyway, like, the big point kept coming back to is these were things that happened in Steph's past. She has been forgiven, and we're called to see her as Christ sees her, and that's beautiful. And I get to see her like that. And to me, marrying her in this relationship shows exactly what faith is all about. Grace to all people who have made mistakes. And this is the extent of grace, that it takes all that sin and it washes it away. And it's not part of her identity anymore. It's not what we see. We see someone who's made perfect by the blood of the Lamb. And that is an amazing, amazing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Sorry,
was
I
a
talked for a
battle.
long time. But
No, that's good because it would have been really weird if it came from me. Um, just to rewind a little, during that whole process, like that wasn't a one conversation thing. It was many,
yeah,
many
this is a
conversations.
long, many conversations.
And of course, to be certain that that everyone's clear about this, 99% of the church was ecstatic for us. It was that 1%, and this happens so much in life where you have all of this good, but then you have this one struggle that seems to just defeat you. Even though you have all of this good happening, all of this excitement, you have this one battle, and for some reason that just takes you out. It's so minuscule, just one little thing, one person it could be, and it just deflates you when you have all of this other good, excited things happening and people excited for you. How big of an impact that just 1% makes. And so that was a battle for us. You were so confident during that time, though. How many times did I say, like when I would come to your house and you would just be defeated and you'd have tears in your eyes and you'd be like, Steph, this happened. They said this and this is what they said. And how many times did I say, Titus, this is not worth it. I don't want you to lose. I don't want this family to lose St. Paul and their church family because of me. I don't want to push someone out of church because of a relationship. And I'm like, and it's not worth your ministry for me to date you. And I was just trying to be like, let's end it. Let's not, as hard as that is, like,
Yeah.
it's not worth it. And
And then
the whole time you're like, no, this needs to happen. If we were to say, because somebody had an opinion on something and my conscience didn't agree with it, it would be wrong of me to go against my conscience to make somebody else happy when it's not what God wants or what God says.
Yeah, and I remember I kept saying, Steph, this is not about you and me. Ultimately, it's about grace and understanding the degree of grace. And this is such a valuable lesson for all of us to go through and to realize that this is what grace is. This is how complete it is. And this is what Jesus demanded people to realize when he preached and he taught and the people he spent time with. Like, and everyone's wondering, why are you spending time with tax collectors and sinners? Why are you letting this prostitute wash your feet? Why do you even bother caring for them? And his point all the time was, I didn't come for the righteous. And his point is those who think they're righteous all the time or got it all together. I came for sinners. Because that's the essence of grace. God comes to save the unlovable, those who are, and I don't say that to say like Steph was unlovable. I mean that to say that God loves every sinner. All of us are unlovable. I was unlovable. That's the point. Like, Steph was the point of this person's objection, but I knew in my heart that I was just as much the subject of her point, because I knew my sin. It may not be as obvious. It wasn't public knowledge that everyone knew about, but I knew I didn't deserve to be a pastor. I knew that I don't deserve to be in God's kingdom, that I don't deserve to be saved. That's what the Bible tells us, is that all of us are unworthy and all of us receive undeserved grace. And we're all pieces of junk, pieces of crap that God rescues. And that is grace. And when you understand that about yourself, you become much more capable to give grace to others. And the beauty of this story, kind of long term, is that one of the people that struggle with this the most over time.
Well, they left the church ultimately
Yeah,
because of it.
so that did happen. So that was really hard.
For the reason of us being together, they left the church. And that was hard. It was a beautiful, we like love that family. It was really hard when they were there because I was uncomfortable and I was embarrassed, and obviously I was felt as
Didn't want to be a stumbling block to them.
exactly. I felt like I was stumbling block to them, but I was also like a hindrance, but I was also embarrassed and judged, and I don't even know the word I'm looking for. It was the tension around these people when I was there was not good. It was very much and I'm not going to say how they felt because I don't know, and I'm not going to say that they had animosity towards me, but from my perspective, for example, we never had a conversation after that. It wasn't like we were friendly after that or during that scenario. And then they did end up leaving the church. So it was just so hard because it was tension as soon as I would walk through the doors. And I needed that because I learned so much. And I think right away in our early marriage, even, I was like, we can't ever get a call to another church because it's gonna be a battle of I'm gonna be ashamed to let anyone know that I had kids before you, and they're gonna figure it out, and that's gonna be an elephant in the room.
Maybe there'll be more people,
and there'll be more, and I'll push more people away, and there's gonna be
we don't want to cause a division.
so much division, and that was a fear that I had. So going through that, even after they left the church, I was like, it's not over. Not only did we lose them, but now I have this whole life ahead of me that it's going to happen no matter where we go. And it hasn't so far, of course. And now, and actually, I've grown so much seeing your confidence in it and the things that you said and the way you handled it. And I learned so much about grace that I'm confident enough that I don't worry about it. In fact, it would be a disservice of me to not come out and say, these children are my biological children, not Titus's. I'm excited to talk about that now. Compared to then, I was ashamed.
And I think that's because, like, not only in our personal life, but because we've just seen over and over again in the congregation and in our own experience that God does amazing things through broken pieces, like
situations.
The amazing grace that he can show through our failures and how he can use that to make our life even more amazing or more faithful to him is astounding. Yeah. We talked a little bit about that in the last episode, but just here too, like that I get to be a father to these two boys is one of the greatest gifts in the world. I had to learn to be a father as well as a husband when Steph and I got married, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. And that was an opportunity for me to step into that role and to grow. And then I see these blessings that I get to care for and love. Yeah. And yeah, like you talked about how much they blessed your life just by having them, and your parents getting to be a part of that, your dad, and just how much that he did for the
perspective.
Landon and Jackson, and
it's unbelievable. And even to broaden that horizon in more than situations just of that scenario, I would say as a person, as a Christian woman, I have embraced the fact that I am your wife, but I'm also a sinner. I've embraced that because of what God did for me. And so like for real life example. As a pastor's wife, that's a whole nother topic. But as a pastor's wife in general, there's a lot of what's the word, like speculation or like expectations built around being a pastor's wife. You see, not because they are expected of this, but you see a lot of times a pastor's wife is going to play the organ. In fact, when you're called to a new church, a lot of times they'll ask you, does your wife play the organ? And we very, very fastly say, nope. But play the organ, teach Sunday school, which is actually something I loved, or be a teacher or a called worker. I have never been to a private school in my life. I didn't go to MLS. I didn't go to a private school growing up. I went to public school all my life. And here I am, married to a pastor. Not only that, but I don't do those things that a lot of pastors' wives do. And it's almost like they are a team in ministry because they do those things. But what I really embrace is the fact that I am totally one of God's children here on earth, married to not a pastor, but I'm married to Titus. And I have the gift of being a part of this ministry as his wife, but also just as a child of God. And the way that I serve in the church is because that's what I am so inspired to do. Those are the things that I want to serve God with all of my heart, not out of expectation of the humans. Or obligation. If I did that out of obligation, it wouldn't be right.
So it's more in, that general sense that every Christian gets to serve the rest of the body, not because you're the pastor's wife and you have to. It's something that you get to be a part of because you are part of this Christian church.
And I'm a little colorful. I have
outside the box.
Outside of the box, I am, and I can't help it.
And you shouldn't.
And it's me, and obviously I screw up a lot. And you help me through that, but it's because I am human. But I also, through this whole situation, before we were even married, through learning that you were dating someone with children, I gained so much confidence in that with other pastors, giving us boosts of this is good and reminding us of God's grace. Through all of that, I was able to grow so much that today I am completely confident and comfortable in who I am, married to a pastor, and still my own person and serving God in my own way. So I am not eloquent all the time. And I obviously want to glorify God in all that I do, but it looks different than a lot of other pastors' wives, for example. But I would never want to change me.
Which I'm so thankful that you feel that way and that Steph's grown confident enough to feel that way herself too, because I wouldn't want her to be someone else either. That's what I fell in love with, is that she embodied raw grace. It didn't have to be polished. It didn't have to be what it was supposed to look like. And that's what made it even more beautiful, because that communicates to me what God's work looks like. And it communicates to so many other people that aren't polished, because even those that are, they're not.
Right.
I mean that with every pastor and pastor's wife too. They may have a look of normalcy and fill the boxes, check the boxes, and look the way they're supposed to. But every single person on this earth is a sinner on the inside who is struggling, and also a saint. And so there's that tension. And whether we're good at following the outward rules or not doesn't change the fact that we're all going through that struggle inside. And finding our identity and embracing our identity primarily in Jesus and his grace, not in anything else, not in being a pastor's wife, not being a pastor, not being someone people look up to who do all the right things and are normal, but finding our identity in Christ. That's the essence of the gospel, is that we are reflections of him in the grace that he has given us. And I guess that was kind of the whole purpose for this episode, was to just talk about that raw grace. And by telling some of Steph's story and us getting together, it just demonstrates that we had to wrestle through that as a couple, as we were dating, me and as a pastor, and Steph as someone dating a pastor. and then having a congregation involved, and what does it look like for a pastor and his wife, and
Yeah.
just really getting distilled down to what are we here for? What does a congregation do? What are we preaching? And remembering that the essence of that is grace, and that Jesus is everything for us.
You will not get perfection from me, and you won't get perfection from Titus as your pastor.
No, you will not.
But what we will promise you is that no matter what decision we make, whether it's with our family, whether it's with our friends, whether it's with the church, and how Titus, whether he speaks up about something or doesn't speak up about something, if it is something, no matter what we are doing, I can promise you that we are making those choices, standing up for certain things, and speaking out against certain things because we how do I put this in words? We make every single life choice depending on what God tells us, and not meaning that He speaks to us in the middle of the night, but this is good in the eyes of the Lord, or this is what we see as being faithful with what we have, which is a benefit of being married to a pastor, by the way. He will always pick out the biblical reasons for a situation or a decision, and I am so thankful for that.
Yeah, and you had to tell me that was part of what I was doing, because I didn't always realize
Because
that.
you
I
weren't,
could see.
yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because just kind of a disclaimer on this episode, because when you talk a lot about grace, it doesn't mean that right and wrong doesn't matter, and that sin is not sin. Like,
Right.
Steph's the first one to tell you, like, she made mistakes, and that's serious. So we're not saying just do whatever you want because God will forgive you.
Yeah.
Like, and if you truly love and understand what Jesus did for you, you're not just going to go up to him and spit on his face while he's on the cross by saying, like, I'm just going to keep sinning because you can take more, and punch him in the leg and like stab him with a knife while he's up there. Like, you realize how stupid that sounds? Like, if you visualize like each sin being like another wound you give him, that's not someone who loves and appreciates what's been given. And so in no way are we saying like you can just live your life however you want. But when it comes down to it, what gets us into heaven and what makes us part of his church and what makes us worthy to serve him, it is the grace that we have been given, not how good we are. Another disclaimer just on pastors, like, yes, there are pastoral requirements, and it'd be good for you to review that, and like that could be another episode too. But just wanted to say, like, and make sure we're clear about that too. The objections that were brought were good. Old Testament priests are one thing, and New Testament pastors are a little bit different. Like, there were a lot of regulations in the Old Testament. New Testament's a little bit different, but there is a list there.
There's still
And it is important that Steph and I set an example as best we can morally. And if we did something now, like let's say one of us was unfaithful, which will not happen, but I'm just giving an example to each other, that could disqualify us from ministry, because right now we're in that role. The difference here with Steph and I is that Steph was, those things that happened in the past. And by the time I came into it, that was resolved. It was forgiven and forgotten. Like, even if that was in some people's memory, those sins were behind her, and she was already living a different life. So if that makes sense, like, she was living that repentance and a different lifestyle. And that's different than if she was actively doing those things while we were in that public role. So that plays like you said, there was a lot of conversations there, and we summed that up. But I just wanted to make sure, just to say a couple of those things so no one gets the wrong idea or takes it out of context, which you might anyways. But remember, this is a podcast, and this is not a doctrinal statement. Treat it as such. And try not to burn us at the stake, because we want to partner with you to share the gospel for time to come. But I hope this is a benefit.
That was a real life scenario that...
It's raw grace. It's very raw.
Raw situations, raw feelings. And yeah, it still affects our daily life today, which is great.
It reminds us to be humble.
Yep.
And to give thanks for the grace we've been given.
Yeah. Yeah. Never mind. I was going to say something and I'm not going to.
So I guess at close, like we feel very blessed by God. We are just over 7 years married, and I've also been a pastor now for 9 years, and it's been a blessing to preach grace and do that with my wonderful wife by my side, who has helped me grow even more than her, maybe, as she helped me realize grace in my life too. Anything else?
No, I think we went over an hour.
Yeah, this is enough.
They're like, are you done yet?
All right. Well, we love you guys. And if you tuned in, thank you so much. And I pray that this is something that helps you feel comforted and assured by the grace that you have been given by God, regardless of what you've done in the past. Cling to your Savior who loves you and remakes you.
Yeah. And by the way, there's no rhyme or reason for our podcasts when they're posted and when they're created, or topics or whatever. It's just, these are, we don't prepare for them. So these are just literally conversations that we wing. And so don't expect like every Monday we're going to drop an episode. We're not professionals. And also we,
or if you get confused by the order of our talking, that's fine.
It's fine. It's
not
chaos.
you, it's us.
It's not you, it's me. And also, there was one other thing I was going to say. Oh, I'm pretty sure though we are going to add this to our resumes. So,
Podcasters.
I think this past week I added three things to my resume. So, we're getting up there in the world.
All right. On that note, let's close.
Yeah.
And then you can tell them more about all of your new resume things. But God bless you.
It's getting better and better. Okay, bye.